Whoa, whoa, whoa. Is it my favorite month of the year that isn't May? That's right, it's Pride Month, celebrating the Ligbits. You might have heard of them from Ellen. And I thought, for a channel that's apparently about gaming history, it's a perfect opportunity to review the Ligbit contributions and representation in our beloved medium. Or I could have also done this in October, which is apparently LGBT History Month. Did you guys need two? I'm willing to make a concession if I can get December as Lyme Disease History Month. Well, until we get that sorted, let's talk about some gay-ass, fruity-ass, homo-ass, molming, wolwing, bicycling, transforming, non-conforming, U-hauling, roller skating, pin-wearing, rainbow-ass video games. With love.
The town inside me and everyone's voice. Only I'm not there, just watching from afar.
Now, I am no scholar on this topic. I am by no means an expert on the experiences of Ligbits and their media. I am what the French would call a sichema. At the same time, doing even cursory research on this subject, there's some unfortunately common trends. Namely, the tendency of gay or bisexual men to be depicted as villains. I've heard a lot about this topic before, and at best it seems like this trope exists because historically a flamboyantly gay man couldn't fill a sympathetic role, and so if a writer wanted to include one in a story, it had to be an antagonist. The other side of that coin is that in certain genres, gay villains were a contrast to a stereotypically male protagonist, especially in genres like noir film, which love their independent vigilante-type men in leading roles.
Now, let's say that you'd like to get rid of your wife.
This is all relevant to gaming because the very first instance I could find of a gay character in a game is 1985's Le Crime du Paquin. This is an early text-adventure mystery game released by the French developer Froggy Software. I can't really play this one because it's entirely in French, but it's about tracking down the murderer of a young woman. This murderer is revealed to be a man named Paco, who, according to Wikipedia, is gay and deals drugs. The same year, Froggy Software would release a similar game titled, Le Mort de Berlin Vassate, whose villain is a gay left-wing terrorist named Carlos who's trying to blow up the Berlin Wall. So, not off to a great start. The early 80s were still a very experimental period for games, and narratives were still the domain of text adventures, or as they're also often called, interactive fiction. Mysteries were really popular in this genre because they're a pretty natural fit for a game, basically being big narrative puzzles, and so a lot of early Ligbit representation is found in titles like this, as it was one of the few places you could actually get attempts at written characters. 1986 would mark the release of Moon Mist. Shocker, another interactive fiction mystery. You play as a detective hired by your friend Tamara to investigate her new home, a castle in Cornwall, England. She's only recently moved in after getting engaged to the castle's lord, and she's become paranoid about a ghost tormenting her. It's up to you to search the castle, talk to various guests, find secret passages, and figure out if there's really something supernatural going on, or if something far more human is lurking in the shadows. The game actually has a number of different story routes depending on your answer to a character who asks you for your favorite color at the beginning. In the blue storyline, the culprit is revealed to be the guest Vivian Pentreath. She's not actually going after Tamara, but looking for revenge on the lord of the castle. See, she was in love with his former fiancé, and was jealous that she chose him over her. Again, not the most flattering depiction of a lesbian character, but at least it isn't just being attached to her to make her seem like an extra disturbed freak. It's more just a part of her character that at least logically informs her actions. And speaking of text adventure mysteries with lesbians, Caper and the Castro from 1988. This is the first instance I could find of a Ligbit protagonist in a game, a lesbian detective named Tracker McDyke. Which I can say, okay? It's not a slur. It's Irish. So the Dykester gets a call from one of her friends, a transgender woman named Tessie LaFemme, who's about to give her some valuable information when the line gets cut. Now you're tasked with investigating her disappearance and eventually rescuing her. The game takes place in the historically gay Castro district of San Francisco. It was developed by C.M. Ralph, who at the time was living in the Bay Area and wanted to develop something to give back to the community. Thus, Caper in the Castro was distributed via gay bulletin boards to raise money for AIDS charities. This was a really personal issue to Ralph, as they'd seen a lot of friends die of the disease. The game eventually reveals that Tessie's disappearance was part of a plot to release toxins into the local water supply, a pretty clear allegory for the real-world illness sweeping the gay community at the time.
Hey babe, so the video I'm working on right now about gay games, there's a game called Caper and the Castro, and it's a mystery where at the end you find there's a trans woman who's gone missing.
Is it me?
and you find out at the end that she's trapped in a cellar. And she gets saved by a lesbian detective.
Damn, I get saved by Sasha Cal Supergirl.
Shut the fuck up!
1 year later, in 1989, Ralph published an alternate version of the game called Murder on Main Street, in an attempt to make a little bit of money off of the project. This was a straight-washed release, which was identical to the original in every way, except for the names and references to gay subculture being changed. The original game languished in obscurity for decades, due in part to its underground distribution method, but also the fact that very few physical copies were made. It was developed on HyperCards for the Apple II GS, a very old format on a very old platform. Luckily, in 2017, Ralph discovered a few copies at the bottom of a drawer while moving, and was later reached out to by Adrian Shaw, the director of the Ligbit Video Game Archive. With a little bit of work, it would be fully uploaded to the Internet Archive, where it's playable today. Sticking in 1988 and Super Mario Bros. 2 with Birdo. This story is pretty well known by now, but Birdo, this little pink Yoshi type thing, is described in the game's English manual as a male who, quote, thinks he's a girl. Again, not a great start, but the story of Birdo's gender identity isn't as open and shut as you'd think. See, in subsequent releases of Mario 2 USA, as it's known, Birdo wasn't referred to with any gendered pronouns at all, and there's further discrepancy between the Japanese and English versions of later titles as well. Her trophy description in Super Smash Bros. Melee keeps the bit about her thinking she's a girl in Japanese, but the English localization just calls her a woman. Strangely enough, there would be another split in Brawl's trophies. There, the Japanese still says she thinks she's a girl part, but the English goes out of its way to say she's of indeterminate gender. She makes a cameo appearance in the 2008 Japan-exclusive Captain Rainbow. Already off to a great start. Captain Rainbow is tasked with going around helping minor Nintendo characters in order to regain his popularity, and in Birdo's story, she's been arrested for going into a woman's public restroom. Topical. He then has to find an item to prove her femininity. The item is a vibrator. It's a weird game. There's been a lot of postulating on what the intent of Birdo's character is in regards to her gender, and personally, I think it's kind of dumb. Mind you, the backstory given in the Mario 2 USA manual is a pretty direct translation of the one from Doki Doki Panic. So, some rando in 1988 had to write character descriptions for the manual to a promotional game for a media festival that was basically itself a big promotion for Fuji TV. The only reason anyone cares about this game is because it was reskinned into Mario 2. In my opinion, there's a lot of people who put way more thought into Birdo than the creators or owners of her. Even the discrepancy in how her gender is written in Smash is probably just some guy going, oh wait, what's the official word for Birdo? Is it a girl dinosaur? Or wait, huh? Indeterminate gender, sure, fuck it. The fact is, for the last 15 years, Nintendo has considered Birdo among their roster of female characters. I doubt they will ever bring up the trans thing, so, hey, it's a fictional character. Why not? Why can't she be trans? She's trans. So, while editing this, I discovered that Nintendo has actually done a lot more pussyfooting around Birdo's gender in recent years. Pretty recent years, than I than I knew beforehand. But in a weird way. So in the US release of Super Mario Party, Birdo is called she, but in specifically the UK version, she's referred to as he. So, and then in like other European languages like Spain, they just eschew all gender entirely for some reason. And then in Mario Tennis Aces, which is also from 2018, they refer to Birdo as a he. It just like straight up. At a certain point, it's so inconsistent that you're like, wait, is Birdo like a species, like Yoshi's? Like there's multiple Yoshis. He's called Yoshi's, but he's like a species of them. Are there multiple species or members of the Birdo species, and they all just happen to look the exact same, but they're some are male and some are female? Yeah, it's kind of annoying, and also really weird that only in European English releases that there's this discrepancy. I don't get it. Let's skip ahead to 1992's Ultima 7, The Black Gate. This beloved WRPG has a bit of a watershed moment in the baths at Buccaneers Bay. Here, the player can pay to have sex with either men or women, regardless of their character's own gender. In 1998, years later, Star Ocean Second Story and Fallout 2 would also let you choose a relationship with characters of any gender. It's pretty small, but I think it's emblematic of a very particular method of representation unique to games. See, when a lot of people consider games with gay characters, they often dismiss instances where someone's sexuality is up to player choice. Even I did when I was first researching this video. But as I thought about it, I realized it's kind of cool in its own way. Yeah, it's not a character who's written from the ground up to be unstraight, but the fact that this medium allows you to express yourself in that way is something that nothing else can claim. It rarely, if ever, has an effect on the plot, but it almost makes it more casual. Like, you can have your character be gay, and it's not a big deal. They're just allowed to be that. You could probably make a really bad faith argument that there's some message about sexuality being a choice in there, but I don't think that's the intent with any of this stuff. In the future, I think it would be cool to see a game where your character's sexuality did have some plot importance, even in a minor way, and that was a decision you could make for yourself. A couple quick ones. 1993's Dracula Unleashed, which features a character named Alfred Horner, who owns a bookstore.
Do you have any books on vampires?
What?
He's never explicitly stated to be gay, but he is implied to be a vampire, and there's a whole relationship between vampires and blood and sex, and he's very interested in the main character's paper cut.
It's just a minor cut.
It's never minor where blood is concerned.
Oh, he wanted to help with that, all right.
This is what the kids call queer-coded, aka some shit I made up. Or did I? And if he is gay, this would be the first speaking role given to a gay character in a game.
Those who unearth such things often end up in the earth.
2 years later, The Orion Conspiracy was a point-and-click adventure about a father named Devlin McCormack trying to find his estranged son's murderer. Along the way, he discovers that after running away from home, his son Danny had entered into a relationship with a man named Steve Kaufman. His son's sexuality is a shocking revelation to him, and the scene of him confronting Steve is pretty intense. Heads up, slurs incoming.
So now you know the truth.
Why didn't you tell me?
Tell you what? That your son was homosexual? Gay? A faggot? Which particular way would you like to have been told?
I have a right to know.
You gave up all your rights when you drove him away. We told each other everything, and he told me that you didn't give a damn about him.
That's a lie. Who the fuck do you think you are?
I'm the only person Danny had left. The only person who cared about him.
He was my son. I loved him.
But your pride won't let you believe that he was gay.
That's got nothing to do with it.
Oh no? Then why are you searching through his private things?
I'm trying to find out why he died.
Well, now you can add crime of passion to your list. Maybe it was a lover's tiff.
I'm not saying that.
Bullshit. You're as bad as the company's Families for the Future policy, blaming the nonconformists, the misfits, the deviants.
Did you have anything to do with Danny's death?
Ha! What do you think? Work it out for yourself.
A prequel comic was included with the game that reveals Devlin lost his ability to work due to lung damage after a wartime attack on his ship, and in their hyper-corporate space colony, this renders him a social outcast racked with depression and survivor's guilt. It's never stated exactly how it affected their relationship, but you can infer that Danny never felt comfortable enough to tell his father who he really was, and this idea haunts Devlin. There's a trope known as burying your gays, which refers to the fact that gay characters in fiction rarely get to be happy. They're always ending up dead or in some dismal state. I can't say if this is a good or bad example of that, but at the very least, this game is trying to tell a story about a complicated relationship and a father trying to understand his son after it's too late. I couldn't find a hard credit for the writer of this game, but it feels like it comes from a real place, or it was at least inspired by something real. It would be criminal if I made a video like this and I didn't talk about a number of notable Ligbit developers. I've talked at length about Danielle Bunton-Berry, but we're going to do it again. Shorter this time. You can go watch these videos for the full story. She was a ridiculously innovative designer in the field of multiplayer gaming, and it's not an exaggeration to say that the modern landscape of multiplayer would be completely different without her contributions like Mule and Modem Wars. After her transition, she unfortunately lost a lot of opportunities, and it's really shameful. Still, decades after her death, I like to keep bringing her up because her memory really does deserve to live on. Alright, I got my obligatory Danny Bunton rant out of the way. Rebecca Heineman is another trans woman who's gained a legendary status in the programming world. Burger Becky, as she's known, has had her hands on a countless number of classic titles in programming and engineering roles. The Bard's Tale games, Age of Empires, Command & Conquer, Medal of Honor, Icewind Dale, Hexen, Baldur's Gate 2, Jazz Jackrabbit, Out of This World, Neuromancer. It's a lot. One of my favorite stories, which I'll have to abbreviate for time, was when she was tasked with porting Doom to the 3DO. Basically, this guy Randy Scott set up a company to publish games because he thought it would make a lot of money, and Doom was the biggest game ever at the time, so he licensed out the rights to make a port for the 3DO. So he said, "Hey Becky, we're making this port. Can you polish it up a bit for the final release? We're gonna add like 12 new weapons and a bunch of enemies and stuff in." And she said, "Sure." Then she got the game, and it was a completely unmodified copy of the Jaguar port. So she says, "Hey, what's this? Where's the port?" And he goes, "Oh, don't you just make it work?" And she was like, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "I'm gonna need it in 10 weeks. So she slaves away for the next 10 weeks, living out of her office, trying desperately to get the game to even boot up properly on the 3DO. Turns out all those promises Scott had made about adding new weapons and such were made under the impression that you did that by, like, drawing the weapons, and then it just worked like magic. Naturally, that stuff was never implemented. Yeah, the port's a disaster, but at the same time, an incredible achievement. The fact that it works at all is because Burger Pecky really knew her shit. David Gator was a huge part of the creative output of BioWare. Not only was he a core designer on games like Baldur's Gate 2 and Knights of the Old Republic, he was also the lead writer for the Dragon Age series and Neverwinter Nights. His work on Dragon Age Origins was particularly lauded for its inclusion of a much-liked gay character in Dorian. His story very much concerns his father not accepting his sexuality and attempting fantasy magic equivalent to shock conversion therapy. This was a BioWare character who was gay, not just as a result of the player's choice, and whose gayness was one of the centerpieces of his arc. It's really upfront with the topic.
But what was the first thing you did when your precious heir refused to play pretend for the rest of his life? You tried to change me.
I only wanted what was best for you.
You wanted the best for you. Your fucking legacy. Anything for that. I wouldn't put on a show, marry the girl, keep everything unsavory, private and locked away. Selfish, I suppose. Not to want to spend my entire life screaming on the inside.
I thought this quote was pretty interesting from an IGN interview in 2015. Quote, "There's a tendency for every character's default to be straight, white, and male in our industry, and nobody questions that default. No character ever has to justify why they're straight, white, and male. The moment you make them anything else, you suddenly need reasons why that's okay. Or do you? A certain amount of deliberateness is required to challenge the idea of a default, and while it feels a bit unnatural to do so, it's absolutely necessary. It's a way to create without unthinkingly doing things the same way simply because that's how you've always done them." Anna Anthropy has devoted much of her gamography to titles about Ligbit themes, or simply ones with queer characters in general. One of her best-known titles, Mighty Jill Off, is a simple platformer featuring two women in a BDSM relationship, the titular Jill and her queen, who wants her to ascend their tower after kicking her down it. Anthropy is also the designer of 2012's Dysphoria, which was an attempt at encapsulating the feelings she had while undergoing hormone replacement therapy. Also, because I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't mention it, her game Lesbian Spider Queens of Mars almost certainly takes inspiration from the title of Leather Goddesses of Phobos, an Infocom text adventure comedy which was also sex positive. And now, the moment you've all been waiting for. The thing I had to bring up in this video, or I would literally die. Yeah, I have a whole video on the artwork and style of the Guilty Gear series, but even a cursory glance at it will tell you that it's very rock and roll inspired. Part of that love of classic rock that creator Daisuke Ishiwatari infuses into the series is an inclusion of characters who break traditional stereotypes or represent more marginalized fringes of society. Even in its first entry in 1998, Guilty Gear had a notable queer character in Testament, a human who was fused with a kind of bioweapon called a gear. Testament in the first game considers themselves both male and female. You can see this in their androgynous look, as well as the fact that their voiceover is actually a male and female voice layered over top of each other and distorted. This was all confirmed in a newsletter written by Daisuke himself around the time of the game's release. Now, Testament's gender is a bit of a funny story, because while this was common knowledge in Japan, it wasn't until the character's reintroduction in the most recent entry, Strive, that most English speakers became aware of it. This is because Testament had always been translated as male. This is an easy confusion to make on the translator's part because Japanese almost never uses pronouns to refer to people. So if they just looked at Testament with no notes, they would probably just assume, I guess it's like a guy. By the time of Strive, Testament's non-binariness was altered to be that they don't identify with any gender at all. They replace their gender with hobbies. The second game in the series, Guilty Gear X, also introduced the character Venom, who is openly gay. In fact, Venom's story revolves around a very common, very tragic struggle that many gay people face. He's in love with a straight guy. If you're laughing, I'm serious. This is his whole deal for like 5 games. His love for the gorgeous Zato 1 comes from the fact that Zato was the first person to acknowledge him as having any value, and so he develops this cultish attachment to him and the Assassin's Guild they belong to. And Zato is ignorant of it to an almost comedic level, like, he's only got eyes for his Russian babe. Well, eyes metaphorically. Eventually, after the story of Guilty Gear Xrd, Venom decides that his love is a lost cause and he needs to find something else in his life to draw meaning from. So he quits the Assassin's Guild and opens a bakery with a robot sidehead kick. Robot head sidekick. Of course, the most popular Ligbit character in Guilty Gear has to be Bridget. She has a very weird, convoluted backstory, but basically, Bridget would have been raised as a boy, but a local superstition forced her parents to present her to the world as a girl. Privately, she still identified as a boy, and her parents felt tremendous guilt for forcing her to live as a girl, despite giving her a great life in pretty much every other way and being really loving. So in order to dispel the town's superstition, she sets out to find work as a bounty hunter, insisting to everyone else she meets that she is, in fact, a boy, despite dressing like a nun. Great plan, Bridgie. Eventually, she's successful in her bounty hunting, and the superstition is wiped away. By the time of Strive, Bridget realizes that her whole gender identity has been based on 1, things she wasn't allowed to be, and 2, feeling responsible for putting her parents through years of guilt. Now that she doesn't feel pressure to be any one way, she discovers that she might actually identify more closely with being a girl, and resolves to live truer to herself.
This is why every trans girl you've seen online has a Bridget profile picture.
Wow, what a neat story. I sure hope no one bases way too much of their personality on some vaguely remembered dialogue from a 20-year-old game so they feel like they're under attack when a character develops in a way they didn't expect. That would be really annoying to put up with for like 6 months. But for real, Guilty Gear has some of the most balanced queer representation in any game series I've seen. Definitely the most consistent. I haven't even talked about Baiken and Anji, who are like giant neon signs of gender non-conforming men and women who've literally ousted themselves from traditional Japanese community to pursue their own goals. You know, the topic of Ligbit representation in games is a really deep rabbit hole, and I was only able to talk about a fraction of it here. I tried to hit the highlights in terms of games and creators, as well as some things I found personally interesting, but I'm sure there's a lot I missed. I also wanted to focus on older examples because they're a lot less well-known than modern ones. I mean, if I have the choice to make a video on Dracula Unleashed or Life is Strange, which one do you think I'm gonna pick? On that topic, we've certainly made a lot of strides in representation over the years. From being used as a synonym for freak to just a thing a character can be. From pretty insensitive descriptions of what being trans is to a thoughtful character arc about understanding yourself. It's not perfect, but I have hope in my heart that one day soon the pendulum will swing all the way back around to love. You know, to be honest, with all this pride talk and seeing all these flags, I'm feeling a little left out. I just want equal representation. I want a flag that represents me, Taigen, from the Cellar, with my channel's colors. And that's why I created the Cellar Pride flag. That's right, post this to your social media with hashtags like Pride and I support to show your solidarity with me. Wear it in public to let everyone know you're a real Cellar dweller. And together, one day, we can have a future where I have equal rights. I have a Patreon and a podcast. Bye.
Here comes a daredevil. Game over.